Thank you all so much for coming to SLC VegFest and especially for attending UARC's first ever Salt Lake City Mayoral Forum. Before I introduce our moderator and candidates, I want to take just a second to thank a few of the sponsors that made VegFest possible this year. SLC VegFest is presented by our local nonprofit organization, Utah Animal Rights Coalition, or UARC. The festival costs more than $20,000 to put together, and we are incredibly grateful for our members who truly make this event possible. You can learn more about our membership program at the UARC booth. We would also like to thank our generous Guardian sponsor this year, Veg Fund, as well as our flock sponsor, Piper Down. Lastly, we'd like to thank our hen sponsors, Sage Mountain, and the Salt Lake City Arts, Culture, and Event Fund. This festival would not be possible without their generous support of our mission, so I want to give just a quick recognition to them. And because I want to maximize the time of this forum, I'm going to turn things over right now to Taylor Stevens, who's moderating our event. She's a reporter with the Salt Lake Tribune. Thank you so much, Taylor.
Good afternoon and welcome once again to SLC VegFest and to today's debate between the two candidates looking to lead Salt Lake City. In an effort to get as much time as possible actually listening to the candidates, I'll get right into the rules of today's debate between Salt Lake City Councilwoman Erin Mendenhall and State Senator Luz Escamilla. The debate will last roughly an hour, which isn't a ton of time, so we'll have to stick to the time allotted. Each candidate will be allowed a 1-minute opening statement. After that, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to a range of pre-written questions of which they have had no advanced knowledge, with 2 opportunities for a 1-minute rebuttal that I'll leave to the candidate's discretion when to use those. Candidates, if you'd like to use a rebuttal, just raise your hand and we'll make that happen. There will be no closing statements. We'll have a timer in the front row. We'll be holding signs at the 1-minute, 30-second mark and when candidates are out of time. Audience members, please hold your applause, comments, sighs, exasperated exclamations of support until the end of the debate, with the exception of this moment as we welcome the candidates. We will begin with Councilwoman Mendenhall, who has the privilege of kicking us off with an opening statement of 1 minute, thanks to the results of a coin toss. Councilwoman Mendenhall, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Is this on? Yes. Perhaps not. Hold on, don't start my clock yet. I gotta check this. You want this one? Yeah, maybe we share. Thank you, Senator. Thank you for being here. It's a great festival. Thank you, Jeremy, and all the other organizers who put it on. My 9-year-old, who's a new vegetarian in the last year since he watched a trout fish die after he tried to catch it, is coming to the fest for the first time. And it's great to just see sort of the spectrum of other vegetarians in the community, and myself included loosely. I will say that to your point at the beginning, Taylor, an hour with a minute each is a lot of time for us. We came from an 8-candidate pool, and it's an honor to be here in the final 2 with the good senator, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today. I want to also mention that Salt Lake City, as you know, is an incredible place to live and work and play. And I'm grateful for festivals like this and the 9th and 9th Street Fair that's today and the Wasatch Hollow Festival that's also going on today that make this place such a place of character and it gives us a sense of place as a community. Thank you.
Senator Escamilla.
Thank you. Thank you, Taylor, and thank you, Jeremy, Salt Lake City Festival. It's a great opportunity to be here. I'm just really excited for the opportunity to be here with another strong woman, and we made it out of a group of 8. I think speaks volumes of Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City will have another woman leading the city in the next 4 years, so that's very exciting. Part of why this specific debate or forum, there's multiple names to this, is so critical is it talks about what Salt Lake City is all about, and it's the diversity and the many communities that live here. I'm excited for the conversation, to get educated, to listen as well. Part of attending these festivals is just makes it more powerful. And I think as elected officials, we need to learn, and I'm excited to talk to the many members of the community that care deeply for animals, that also care about what they're consuming, and how we can make a city even more welcoming and make Salt Lake City stronger to welcome everyone. Thank you.
Our first question will begin with you, Senator Escamilla. Opinion polls and consumer habits have indicated a cultural shift underway on animal rights issues, translating into a steady trickle of policy changes across the country. Salt Lake City banned horse-drawn carriages. Illinois became the third state to end testing on animals for cosmetics. New York prohibited declawing. Some cities, like New York City and San Francisco, have even proposed or implemented structural reforms into their governments by creating boards, commissions, or agencies focused on improving animal protection. As mayor, what is your vision for improving the status of non-human animals?
Thank you. So very critical is to have, I think we are moving as a society to understand not only the value of animals. I think we all know them if we've had animals in our lives and they're part of our families, but really in the way we consumption and the way our culture has allowed to have certain practices to be abusive and inhumane. I think the timing is right. A lot of state laws can preempt cities to do things, so we have to be smart as we move forward in what type of things the city can do. I think Salt Lake City will lead in those conversations. One of them is the 2014 law ordinance that passed in Salt Lake City. I think those are the type of examples that we can continue to work on. We can certainly talk about, what New York has done with Meatless Mondays, and how do we promote more collaboration with school district, the jail in the county, to make sure that we have options, vegan options for individuals as we continue to work towards raising awareness. Education is critical. When you get to talk, to inform, to provide and empower communities on information that is important about the impact, not only the part of animal cruelty, but also our impact in our footprint. So having a city that's proactively working in education will be critical. Through an advisory capacity board, I think it's important to have that be part of the conversation, but also promoting those at least once a week to begin with as we start moving towards a more, not only vegan friendly, but really talking about the footprint and the impact it has into our environment as well. So those are some ideas that I want to see how we implement, always taking consideration that we have to work with the state on this preemptive piece so we don't get hit back from the state. Thank you.
Councilwoman Mendenhall?
Thank you. My vegetarian lifestyle started in 1996, and it happened overnight when I saw a documentary about the really animal cruelty practices in factory farming. And I was a teenager, and it was sort of, it became an identity for me. And over the years, obviously I'm far from being a teenager now. It's been about 24 years since I became a vegetarian. But my reasoning over the years has evolved. So when you talk about that cultural shift that's happening and the political shift that's happening, I think that evolution that I've experienced, I see it playing out on the worldwide scale. And as we become an increasingly globalized community, as our phones connect us to everything and we can order anything and we can have it show up at our house the next day, it becomes ever more important for us to expand not just the incentives, but the logic of a more vegetarian lifestyle, if not a complete vegetarian or vegan lifestyle. And that's because climate change is the #1 issue that we are facing as a global community. And we know that food is an incredible part in the entire, we have to think of it as a whole life cycle of a piece of food, from where it's grown or raised to how it is manufactured, what it is packaged with, how it is moved then into whatever realm you buy it, whether it's at a grocery store or delivered to your front door, and then where the waste goes and what happens to it. Methane is 30 times more potent at global warming than carbon dioxide is, and methane gas, as you know, is part of the output, shall we say, of a lot of farmed animals, all the way to the packaging and the waste and everything that goes along with it. The land that the animals is raised on is another piece of it. We have increasing obesity across our country. I'm running out of time, but I can't say enough about all of the reasons, and the climate is at this point in my life
Time.
the #1 reason we need to be having this conversation.
Senator Escamilla would like to use a rebuttal. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Part of, I think, having this conversation, and the good councilwoman mentioned just how it integrates too many things. And going back to some of the work in the legislature on animal cruelty only, emphasizing some of the work we've done. It's been hard. I mean, we've done everything from, protecting animals from fighting, which, they use them as a way of incentivizing that type of action. But really, this idea of our greenhouse gas and that impact, we know it's 14.5% of the impact. This is in the whole world. And part of it is promoting more, not only vegan as a practice, but sustainability in the way we get our food. And we'd love to start talking about some huge reforms with regards to technology. I mean, we can, especially in Salt Lake City, where it's bigger, we can certainly do vertical indoor agriculture and start promoting that type of activity within our city and have incentives through the city to make sure that type happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Mendenhall, this question goes first to you. In 2011, West Hollywood City Council approved a ban on the sale of clothing with real animal fur. Similar bans on the manufacture and sale of fur have since passed in Berkeley, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Earlier this week, the California Senate made history when it sent Governor Gavin Newsom's desk a bill that would ban fur statewide. Here in Salt Lake City, the last fur-based business closed in 2013. But statewide, there are more mink farms in Utah than any other state in the United States. What are your thoughts on making Salt Lake City a fur-free city and prohibiting the sale and manufacture of fur and fur products?
It's a perfect time to do it. And it reminds me of the Jerry the Horse conversations that my time on the city council started with many years ago, when we were faced with the question of, do we continue to allow these type of businesses, horse-drawn carriage businesses, to operate? And the approach that we took was basically to vote. We did ban them ultimately, and the business ceased operation, and it was a good time to officially remove any future businesses from taking the opportunity of getting a business license for horse-drawn carriages. Now is a perfect time, and Jeremy and others have done a good job of raising the opportunity for the Salt Lake City Council to enact ordinances protecting animals and animal cruelty. And we did the puppy mill ban just last year, which again, we don't have any in the city. It was a perfect time for us to make sure that going forward, we don't have any either, and we worked with the county on that one.
Thank you. Senator Escamilla?
Agree with Council Member Erin Mendenhall. So it is the time. It makes sense. It's actually I think, politically a safe thing to do for Salt Lake City, and I like the approach. I agree 100% with her, and so we will have that take place if that. And I just think thank you. It's an issue of timing, in the sense of when the city welcomes that, and again, thinking of how we then make sure, knowing the players, so we don't get a preemptive piece from the state. I think in this sense, for Salt Lake City, it makes sense, and I believe we have an opportunity to do it, and it will just show being proactive versus just reactionary. The timing is right.
Thank you. Senator Escamilla, this question goes first to you. The Salt Lake City Sustainability Office has an online resource titled Dining with Discretion, where it describes the adverse environmental impacts of animal agriculture. Other cities have implemented programs and policies to encourage a transition away from animal agriculture, such as New York City's Meatless Mondays program, where all city public schools provide only vegetarian meals on Mondays. Are there any actions that you would take as mayor in terms of city policies or programs to encourage a shift away from animal products and toward plant-based options?
Yes, and it goes back to that first opening piece. I mean, we have to be intentional. We have to be proactive. We have to be ahead of the game, and Salt Lake City is the right place to do a lot of these more intentional and progressive pieces. One, working, obviously, the one is within our facilities, with Salt Lake City facilities. That should be not only Mondays, but have it be an option the entire week. I mean, so it's just go it's beyond one day a week, but the entire week have that be an option, but at least on Mondays be the day where we emphasize. I think it's a good start. And then working with the Salt Lake City School District, they obviously are, an independent entity, but we can collaborate with them and support them. The jail, that happens to be with the county, But it makes sense. If Maricopa County in Arizona can do this, we certainly can do that in Salt Lake County. So Maricopa County did that successfully, and it actually has a huge return on investment. So from an economic development perspective, it makes sense. You save money. That food doesn't, we can keep it for a long period of time. So it makes sense. So from all the angles, it's not only embracing, it's not only addressing issues of greenhouse gas and the impact it has. It is not only addressing animal cruelty issues, but also it just makes sense. It makes sense from a fiscal perspective, and those will be pieces that I would like to tackle right away. But at least in our facilities in Salt Lake City, that should be something that we can implement, day one, and then obviously we'll work in collaboration with the other entities.
Councilwoman Mendenhall.
I've done a lot of jobs in my life here in Salt Lake City, from a barista to a councilwoman and a student and others in between. And for a time, I did catering and for the Midwives College of Utah, and it was my great joy to surprise them with vegetarian food without them recognizing that there wasn't meat. That was my goal, that it would be such a good meal that you didn't even notice there wasn't a chicken breast attached to it. And I've been impressed with and excited by a lot of nonprofit movement across the country to make vegetarian food more attractive to school kids. I know that there are some grants at the national scale that some of these nonprofits are taking advantage of, and I understand there's a nonprofit in the Park City area that is trying to get more healthy food incorporated into the school lunches. I would like to see that happen here, and Salt Lake City has made similar investments with the Square Kitchen, which is an incubator kitchen for startup businesses, and many of them are from refugees who've come to this country and come to our little city here and are looking to bring their cuisine or their culinary talents into our community. I could see an intersection where we're not just combining the opportunity to teach kids about a healthy vegetarian lifestyle, but to bring more international cuisine into the schools. And I think that's a conversation the city's already started with investments like the Square Kitchen. What New York did with Meatless Mondays is something absolutely we should be talking to our school about. And there's a lot of financial, as you know, as vegetarians. My grocery bill, I do buy a lot of nuts, which is expensive, but it's cheaper in so many ways to not buy meat. And so I don't think we're necessarily asking schools to increase their budget in order to accommodate meatless days into the week. And I think it's easier for us to start the vegetarian conversation with kids than it is to convert as adults.
Councilwoman Mendenhall, this next question goes first to you. For decades, Ringling Brothers made annual trips to Salt Lake's Vivint Smart Home Arena. But in 2017, Ringling ended its Traveling Animal Circus Act, partially due to decreased attendance. However, other forms of animal use for entertainment persist in Salt Lake, including the annual Days of 47 rodeo and other smaller traveling circuses that occasionally come through town. These entertainment spectacles are exempt from the state cruelty to animals statute. As mayor, how would you address what many perceive to be the abuse of animals in entertainment, including the circus and rodeo?
Me first? Okay. I remember in anticipation of Ringling Brothers' next visit, before they announced they weren't coming again, I was hearing from Jeremy, and maybe others, but I just remember you, Jeremy, with asking the city council to consider a ban on the circus coming through town, and it was particularly linked to some of the motivation tools that were used on elephants in particular. We were grateful that they canceled that, and that we, not necessarily that we wouldn't have been able to do an ordinance, but on the national scale to have that conversation cease to be relevant with Ringling Brothers altogether. I know that the state, and I believe the senator is partially involved in the board of the rodeo, so you could probably speak more directly to how invested the state is in the rodeo happening. I really I don't have any knowledge of a city ordinance or any kind of incentive the city could create to dissuade that from happening. I also hear from our Fair Park community that's a significant event for the community that a lot of identity is wrapped up into. So I'm open to hearing those kind of conversations, and this is absolutely a state conversation when it comes to the rodeo.
Senator Escamilla.
Thank you. Thanks for that opportunity. So circuses, there's been a decrease on them, as you know, and the big one is gone. Part of it is there's the national, even federal regulatory pieces are very limited from zoos, not only circuses, but zoos, all the way to, pieces like Lagoon, which hopefully we can stop that. Lagoon Zoo is very scary, what's happening there. In terms of the rodeo, and how do you regulate when and that's why there's the federal component, because they're moving from one state to another. And the rodeo itself, that's Days of 47 rodeo, and we are in the West, tend to have a lot of agriculture pieces. I applaud a lot of the work that's been done by PETA and other national organizations to bring very specific reforms on the way animals are treated in some of these events. I think the national rodeos are really high level, which is the Days of 47, have very high standards, and they have independent regulatory pieces within their national piece of you have veterinarians checking that are totally independent from those organizations, and I've seen that, how it works and how they're making sure animals are treated respectfully and they're getting enough shade or the amount of water, where is it coming from, the food that they're eating, making sure they're not, they're doing random testing so they're not heavily getting drugged. And so all of those pieces have been in place, and I feel that's the right approach. So you balance the need for, what it means for a cultural piece and the heritage beyond that, and the pieces related to agriculture as well. We have the state fair, and I know my time is here, and I would like to use my second rebuttal to finish that piece, but I'll
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So the fair and the work that we've done to keep the state fair on the west side of Salt Lake City as a jewel for the state was a monumental effort, and I'm glad to be part of the leading group to make sure we kept that in Salt Lake City. There was a big effort to move it out of Salt Lake City. The fair, part of what the fair does is educates about not only our agricultural history and part of who we are as a state, but also animals, and in a way that is sound, that is respectful, and is taking care of them. So the rodeo fits well in their standards. We get reports on them because they work with national organizations to meet that criteria, and I feel that is critical. And we need to be on top of them, making sure that that continues to be respected.
Thank you. Senator Escamilla, this next question goes first to you. Last year, animal shelters in Utah brought in more than 50,000 dogs and cats, more than 6,500 of which were euthanized. Fox 13 News reported earlier this summer that many shelters in Salt Lake County are, quote, bursting at the seams and face a daunting challenge to rehome these animals, with partnering rescue organizations also at capacity. Last year, I reported for the Salt Lake Tribune about Salt Lake City's new ordinance, which the councilwoman mentioned earlier, banning pet stores from selling non-rescued animals. But the ordinance does not affect breeders in Salt Lake who use online marketplaces like KSL or Craigslist. Mm-hmm. Do you believe there is room for additional city action to help curb the animal overpopulation crisis?
Absolutely. And I think, the part of this, the way we're structured with, as you know, Salt Lake City contracting with Salt Lake County Animal Services, like every other city does. We spend about $1.7 million annually as a city in that type of services. At the same time, there is that collaboration with the Humane Society, and I was just telling a reporter that 11 months ago we became, we welcomed into our family a stray cat that has been outside our home. We took her to the Humane Society to check if she had any other family waiting for her, and we adopted Meow, which is now a member of our family. And we learned through that process is just the waiting, how many cats are coming in. We were asking some questions, and we're an adherent to not kill city and within the county, which I think we can certainly do more, because what's happening right now, we have what we call a 90%, getting the live release rate above 90% is what we need to go. Right now it's 90%, so they get home somewhere else, and we have people right now housing some of the animals, dogs and cats, in a temporary basis, like foster caring for them, but we need to do more. I would like to see a stronger city ordinance on breeding of animals, so we can continue to help the ones that are in need of families and make sure they are placed in safe homes. But we also need to put more infrastructure and help the Humane Society of Utah to make sure that when we do that, when there's surrenders and when we have, especially with cats that are being put back into some communities that are not welcoming them and they're hurting them, that we're doing more to protect them. So we need to higher than 90% integration part, or that metric of having them get back into getting them to live release piece. So the city can do more, and I think in terms of Salt Lake City, we could be leading and an example of how it's beyond the 90%.
Councilwoman Mendenhall.
Yeah, I'm going to just answer this outright. I don't believe that the city can effectively increase our ordinance, and as I've expressed in other questions, I'm totally open to hearing how we can. But so far, breeder businesses, they typically aren't getting a business license, which the city could control. Typically they are not, and because they're selling now on a classified statewide and farther than the state market, this is a state issue. The city can't regulate the advertising on the statewide market, and unless those people are getting business licenses, which thank you to those of you as residents who call up city enforcement and let us know when there's a breeder situation happening in your neighborhood so that we can make sure that we know about this and take the appropriate steps. Without that happening, the city doesn't necessarily have a real lever here. This is a state conversation. It should be a state conversation. And that sad reality of how many animals lose their lives because of whatever circumstances come to bear is tragic. And I think everyone here, raise your hand if you've ever adopted a pet, cat or dog. Yeah, almost all of us. You know how grateful they are. They know they've been adopted. They know they've been rescued, and it is supremely better in my experience than the alternative there. So yes, let's keep opening our homes. When we did the puppy ordinance, we welcomed the Humane Society into City Hall, and they brought a number of cats and dogs, and I don't think they went home, back to the shelter with any of them. So we've joked that we should have a featured pet at every city council meeting, like they have on the billboard. Today we're featuring Chloe, who's a 2-year-old pit bull, and she'd love to go home with you. So I think there are opportunities for the city to better connect our open-hearted community to the pets who need forever homes. But as far as ordinances go, keep talking to me, because I don't think we can do much more at this point.
Councilwoman Mendenhall, this next question goes first to you. The state has struggled the past few years to meet federal limits for ozone, an airborne pollutant that is particularly harmful to children. And that's without taking into consideration a projected boom of 1.5 million new people in the state by 2050, which means more people driving cars and creating emissions. How would you seek to address poor air quality in Salt Lake City as the city grows?
Oh, this is just an air quality question.
It is.
Okay, but I'm going to start it with an animal's beginning, because as the State Air Quality Board chair, I can tell you that the ammonia creation in the Cache Valley up there in Logan, that is largely from cattle farming, is a precursor to their pollution, which has had them in non-attainment for some time, and they're beginning to come out of it in some regards. But absolutely, the farming industry is a component of our pollution problem in parts of the state. Not to mention that we are the most truck-served city in the country as the crossroads of I-80 and I-15. And so even if it's not farming that's pollution, is creating pollution, there are emissions from the delivery process. We know that here in Utah, Salt Lake City's sustainability website will tell you that 25% of a household's carbon footprint is from the diet in the household. And we know that that's dramatically less when it comes to a vegetarian household. And if you look at research at the national level, one of the most significant things you can do besides switching out your light bulbs and a few other things, third, I believe, on the list is switching to a plant-based diet. So absolutely, pollution, emissions, and on the broader scale, global warming and climate change are impacted by the decisions we make at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and the aftermath of that food and waste afterward. So even though air quality is my favorite subject, and it's why I'm in politics, I'm happy to tie it to this relevant vegetarian and vegan and the atmosphere around what we eat, really literally coming into our lungs. So going forward, air pollution, back to the global level, We absolutely need to get renewable energy into Salt Lake City faster, but you know those coal-fired power plants aren't here in Salt Lake City. They're not even in the Salt Lake Valley. And so we're talking more about CO2 reduction. We need to have that conversation, and we need renewables here by about 2023. 5 seconds left. All the way down to bus service, an electric bus fleet serving Salt Lake City. I'll take my rebuttal right now, though, because I want to get through these. We need to get our bus service online faster here. We had our very first circulator buses hit the streets on 21st South, 9th South, and 2nd South about a month ago. That's Salt Lake City, our taxpayer dollars, telling UTA where to drive the bus and when for the very first time. We have 2 more phases. There's a 6 North, 10th North route that's coming hopefully in the next few months, and many more routes, making it easier for you and me to not take our cars. If you drove here today, I rode my bike to the festival, I got a ride here. It is crazy. And frankly, I kind of love seeing traffic in our city in some ways because it's going to help us move this public transportation conversation faster and easier. We need it to be an all-electric fleet. We need to use federal grants and other incentive grants that we can get as a city to build our electric vehicle charging infrastructure so that if you do drive, it's easier to drive an EV. And then down to the front yard, backyard level, I want us to grow the CARROT program, which is the lawnmower and snowblower exchange program that we do at the state right now. We can do that here in the city and reduce those local emissions.
Thank you. Senator Escamilla?
Yeah, thank you. When we talk about air quality and the impact to our communities, I think part of what Salt Lake City needs is we have an honest conversation of how do we include all Salt Lake City residents in the conversation. So obviously, the group of people that's sitting today, you guys care. This is something that's already in your radar. There's many, many more that are probably right now facing a decision on whether they buy milk or they go and pay rent or where they have their kids, if they have a job or not, or if they can have to need 3 jobs to pay rent. The conversation is tough. So having a city hall that's providing opportunities of conversations of sustainability at all levels and to all communities in different places of the city is critical. So if we want to have a more active transportation conversation, make sure that we're closing equity gaps that exist between east and west, south and north. If we want to have a conversation about food sustainability and how do we get the food system to be sustainable, a lot of it will be, obviously moving to a more vegan-friendly way of doing it, but that requires education and changing the conversation with many of these communities. I think technology, so if we're going to be the city that's going to be incentivizing businesses to be in our city, to use technology that will bring, again, that vertical indoor agriculture components that are efficient and that also are addressing temperature within their places of service. We don't do a lot of agriculture here in Salt Lake City, but if we're going to be the city does the consumption and where we buy our own things within the city hall, I mean, that's where you get into the details, is where is City Hall buying their own products? And are we being conscious and intentional about where our own consumption starts? So we start at home, we clean home first, and then go into the communities and start educating the communities at their level that makes sense. So that conversation is not, surreal for them. It's actually real, and it makes sense to them for their own purpose, and it has a direct correlation to their lives.
Thank you. Senator Escamilla, this question goes first to you. Area sources like homes, small businesses, and commercial buildings are projected to outstrip automobiles and other modes of transportation as the major source of air pollution in the coming years along the Wasatch Front, due in part to the advent of cleaner vehicle fuel standards. Salt Lake City in 2017 put new rules in place requiring owners of large commercial buildings to report their energy use, but our reporting shows compliance is off to a slow start. How would you work to address building emissions if elected?
So it's a great question. So building emissions, number 2 right now, potentially going to be number 1 pretty soon here. And I think there's a lot of room to do things there. One is first our own buildings in Salt Lake City. It's hard, to go and tell the private sector or others what to do. Let's check where we are in our own buildings in the city. And then, retrofitting. We've had conversations with experts on where it's more expensive sometimes to retrofit than it is to have a new building when the return investment will come faster. But when we do that, I think it's going to take incentivizing businesses. We need to work with the state, so this is a collaboration effort. The state has funding, and they've been putting more funding in the millions to incentivize change of culture and the change of doing things. Let's bring some of those incentives, and that program can easily be implemented through our sustainability office in the city, where you're actually incentivizing in a way that it makes sense for a business, so they will start doing it in the private sector, but also incentivizing at home. So what would it take to have some of our homes in new development moving towards zero emissions type of entities and facilities, so not only buildings, but homes, or the places that we live. So the same way we use for lawnmowers and others, let's start doing it on the buildings, such as a home or an apartment complex. And I think if you have the right incentive and the right program, people will come our way. It's a carrot and the stick approach. You have to have some enforcement, you have to have certain rules to make it happen, but you also want to incentivize, and the state can be critical in helping us bring millions of dollars to those type of programs. And I think those type of partnerships where you can measure, have a direct measurable performance measure is what people want to see. It's data-driven, you see the impact, and it will be really a good place to start working and seeing outcomes that we want to see.
Thank you. Councilwoman Mendenhall.
Thank you. I was happy and excited to partner with Utah Clean Energy when they proposed this idea originally. We called it Project Skyline, which was to not invent a wheel, but learn from other cities around the country that have targeted buildings 25,000 square feet and bigger, which is what we did, and actually made it a requirement that we could glean their energy consumption information from the power provider, so Rocky Mountain Power in our case. And it sounds like we need to use our enforcement tools better to make sure that it's not necessarily the building owner reporting that to us, but the power provider themselves, who of course collects and bills based off of that information. So I think that there's more that we can do, and I'd like to learn more from our attorneys about how we can use our ordinance better. But going forward, the reason that's important is because those buildings, there's a spectrum of cleanliness when it comes to the environment. There's some really tight buildings and there's some really dirty buildings in terms of the HVAC systems, their water heating systems. And there's ways for us, the whole strategy of this is for us to better target our precious taxpayer dollars at cleaning up the dirtiest buildings first. Going forward, though, we need to make sure that we're partnering with sustainable investors here in Salt Lake City. We're going to have 6 new high-rises in Salt Lake City in the coming years. Some of that construction's already begun. I think of it as a downtown rising 2.0. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get the cleanest possible buildings out of those. I want to mention a few more. I just finished my master's in science and technology at the University of Utah, where I studied environmental science particularly, and there's a lot of great research going on, but implementation happening around urban heat mining, where instead of exhausting all of the heat from the systems off the roof of a building, they capture that heat and use it to do things like heat water and heat the building next door. There's a lot of new technology, and there's a lot we can learn as a city. That's our role as the capital city here in Utah.
Thank you. Senator, actually, this first question goes to Councilwoman Mendenhall. The Salt Lake City Council, acting as the redevelopment agency, recently approved a $28 million tax increment reimbursement for developers seeking to build an industrial site in the city's northwest side within the inland port boundaries. Do you support the use of tax increment as a way to bring business to Salt Lake City? If so, how should it be used?
I like how you've made this about tax increment reinvestment, but not about the inland port, but it's absolutely about the inland port. I have to talk about that one, and I'm going to do my best to do it fast. You said it's in the Inland Port Authority boundaries, and I think that's a really important piece. What the state did in taking away the city's land use and taxing authority for about 20% of our city is an abomination. It has never been done before in the state of Utah, and it's the reason that we're suing the state of Utah. The Inland Port Authority already drew in all that 7,000 acres that is part of the contract Jackie Biskupski signed, I think with good intention actually, to make sure that that acreage north of I-80 develops within the city's normal processes. The reason the Inland Port Authority still drew it into their boundaries is they're really hoping, in Erin's opinion, that we screw up and we lose our contract with those property owners so they can go ahead and take those 7,000 acres out of our hands also. Now, the tax reimbursement is a tool that cities use across the country and throughout the state to make sure that the development that happens serves the public better than it would without the reimbursement. And in the case of that particular reimbursement contract, they are installing streets, public utilities, street lighting, and they're doing site preparation, because if you drive up there, you'll see there's nothing, there's not a road, there's no water or sewer, things like that. And this is a tool that was used even in my neighborhood at 9th and 9th. When a new development's going to happen, if the sewer line itself doesn't have capacity to serve that increase in use, then that developer has to pay for it. The city typically or often incentivizes them doing that work with, we'll pay you back as the increase in value of your property climbs, we collect more taxes, and we're going to pay you back with a piece of those taxes. So I think it's an absolutely yes conversation that cities have to figure out how to get more for their residents in terms of public benefit, but also not shoulder the cost of development onto existing neighbors.
Thank you. Senator Escamilla?
Thank you. So there is a space and a place for RDA and this type of incentives for cities to use. And what you do is you create a partnership of a sustainable, good neighbor coming to your city. I think part of the question, and the specific one, because it is in the inland port area, and the decision that was made by the city was whether that deal was a good deal for the city. So you'd have to get into the details of the deal. I think part of the conversation when you provide those type of incentives in the millions, which are needed for infrastructure, because the councilwoman is right, that there's nothing there. You have to build infrastructure. Is that what type of jobs do we want to have? I mean, if we're going to incentivize and put part of your tax money into incentivizing businesses to come, they have to be jobs that are real, good paying jobs. It has to be jobs that provide childcare and healthcare. And I think some of those questions that came up on that specific deal, where if it's a sense of desperation or whatever the situation was, we have to still be smart. And when those type of contracts are being signed, we have to review what's happening. So yeah, we need to incentivize. Yeah, we want good business partners to be part of our community. We welcome good developers that are responsible, that have a vision of sustainability, and that share our values as Salt Lake City residents. But we also have to be very conscious and, again, intentional on what type of jobs are we bringing to Salt Lake City, because that will still have an environmental impact. There will be congestion happening when you have those type of developments. The type of development that you will see in that area, whether it's inland port or the Northwest Quadrant master plan, is warehousing or type of manufacturing jobs. Okay, how much are we talking about of wages on manufacturing jobs? Those are critical pieces in the conversation that need to happen, and the city is responsible to have those conversations and make that investment be a responsible investment, that it's a good deal for Salt Lake City.
Time. Thank you. Senator Escamilla, this question will go first to you. As part of a new system for delivering homeless services in Salt Lake County, the Road Home Emergency Shelter in the downtown Rio Grande neighborhood will close this fall to be replaced by 3 smaller resource centers, more dedicated to providing services for the community. How would you, as mayor, work to help the shelter-resistant homeless who will not seek services at these centers?
Okay, so the 3 resource centers process, I think, is the best approach. Having a one location for everyone has never worked. It's not best practice, and other cities are struggling with now going from a facility with 5,000 people, and I believe having them integrating into communities makes more sense. Now, there is a population within the individuals experiencing homelessness that are resisting sometimes to get help. But I believe it's because we haven't provided them the correct option of help and the type of process and enforcement that needs to happen within. So one is, I believe that there is an opportunity to bring true wraparound services and good case management to this population. It's going to take us years, and time, and for them years to get back in a place where they're safe and they can be could be part of our community. Some of them have been experiencing homelessness if they're chronic homeless, it's more than a year. So for them, maybe 10 years. Some of them are veterans with dealing with serious mental health and substance abuse. But guess what? Mental health and substance abuse services are served at the county level. A lot of the funding needs to come from the state. Right now, the state is providing 40 police officers in the Rio Grande operation piece, the Rio Grande area, from our Department of Public Safety, our Highway Patrol. So we are going to need in Salt Lake City the support and the collaboration of the state and the county to address this issue. We're not going to do it on our taxpayers' base. It's not possible. I mean, unless people are planning increasing taxes, there's no way this is going to take money. We're going to invest, but the return investment is going to be real with good case management and wraparound services where you can go and offer somewhere where you can build relationships with some of these individuals that are dealing with real trauma, different trauma based on where they're coming from. But I think it's possible, it's doable, but we need to have a community that's safe and that people can feel that they belong to Salt Lake City. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Mendenhall?
Yeah, I've definitely been a part of this conversation at the local level. In the 6 years I've been in City Hall, we've seen a pretty dramatic shift in the way that we're working with the county and the state on how do we render services to people who are experiencing homelessness. And the majority of State Street, well, from 9th South to 21st South is in my district that I've represented and for the last many years. And you know, whether it's North Temple or State Street, there are motels on the street. There are people who, instead of being in the shelter, are trying to make it day to day to pay for a night at a motel. And part of the motivation for me in working on the Homeless Resource Center new model was in learning how much it even costs to stay in a motel over the course of a month, which was almost the cost of my mortgage when you add up each and every night. $80 to $120 a night. It's crazy. And there were no better services for people. And so I want to talk about housing, but first I want to talk about the fact that we have a women's homeless resource center just a couple blocks from here. And I'm proud to have helped champion the need for a women's only resource center as I met with women on the street who told me I will never go back to the road home. I was raped there. Or I've got this dog now to keep me safe and I can't take my dog into the road home. I'm proud of the fact that we have kennels and we have places and acceptance for animals who are companions to people coming into the shelters to be able to sleep there with their pets. That's critical. In providing services, we have to make it easier for people to access the services. And couples staying out of the shelter was another reason that we have a men's and women's shelter now between High Avenue and Paramount. Going forward, the state needs to address the need for emergency shelter options in Salt Lake City. When the road home closes, the state needs to have a plan in place for how we're going to provide opportunities for people. Ultimately, the solution to housing has to be, homelessness has to be about housing. And I have one more. I'll save it. Maybe we'll get to housing in just a second.
Our last question is actually on transportation.
Then I'll
if you'd
take.
like to use it.
I'll take
Go ahead.
my housing portion. Affordable housing. Let us not conflate the homelessness crisis that many people are facing with the whole conversation of the need for affordable housing. Absolutely, we need more affordable housing of all types, from dorm-style housing, which we call SROs, or single-room occupants. Right now, the city's talking about how do we grow those in the city, and I'm saying let's stop concentrating diverse housing types and affordable housing on the west side of our city, which we have done as a city for too long. And we have to make these housing types of all kinds, even to single family, available city-wide. People need access to safe housing, to affordable housing, and to housing that's supported by neighborhoods with services like schools and bus and grocery stores. And we can't continue to concentrate this. That's why I've worked to build the $21 million affordable housing fund a few years ago. And last year when I was the chair, we created the ongoing housing fund through our sales tax revenue that today is producing over $4 million a year, helping people get in and stay in housing.
Thank you. Both candidates out of rebuttals, just in time for our last question. Salt Lake City has one of the largest blocks, some of the largest blocks and widest streets of any major U.S. city, a reality some transportation advocates say prioritizes cars above other means of active transportation. How would you promote walkable neighborhoods in Salt Lake City as mayor to get people out of their cars and reduce emissions? Councilwoman Mendenhall, this question goes first to you.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, because yesterday I had a press conference about this, is an initiative I announced where I'm committing to plant 1,000 trees per budget year on the west side of Salt Lake City. When you look at the map on the city's urban forestry website and look at where the trees are in the city, and then you look at the fact that the city has calculated we have space in our public right-of-ways to plant 25,000 trees in Salt Lake City, yet to be planted, it is really clear where the majority of those trees need to go. And the bottom line is really because we have an environmental justice issue. We have more pollution on the west side of Salt Lake City than we do on the east side of Salt Lake City. And when we talk about threats like the inland port to increasing that pollution load and our growing airport, we have to actually take more out of the air than we're putting in. And the beginning of doing that is planting a tree. A one full-grown tree can take 10 pounds of pollution out of the air per year and produce about 260 pounds of oxygen. Trees make sense because they're walkable. They increase property values, and it makes it more fun and safe to walk down a shaded street. They can even decrease crime in neighborhoods and help increase a sense of place. I think one of the most unique parts about Salt Lake City is that we can get around in different modes and that there's so many intact neighborhoods that make it a pleasant place to walk and be. So scooters are a part of our future. You know, we're about to consider an ordinance on really how do we manage those. I think we actually need to increase enforcement of keeping scooters off of our sidewalks, which is going to be a safety issue for scooter riders in the street. So I hope to see more helmets on people, for heaven's sakes, but that's not something the city can control. Bikes, the bike program, I've been a strong supporter of Green Bike. That's a big investment we've made, and I want to see that continue to grow throughout the city. But we've also done some new initiatives. I already talked to you about the circulator buses, but the city's subsidizing Lyft and Uber rides that will connect you from where you're starting to your transit stop, not your ultimate destination.
Thank you. Senator Escamilla.
Thank you. So when we talk about transportation, we really are talking about sustainability and how we address the very diverse population that we have in Salt Lake City. Talk about equity between East and West. If it takes me, because I've done it a couple of times, more than an hour and 20 minutes to get from Rose Park to downtown where my workplace is, it's problematic. So yeah, we need to move the grid so it actually reflects need and use. It has to be affordable, it has to be convenient. We have to have what they call it amenities, but if it's snowing or raining, we live in Utah. We can have snow and rain in the same day and the sun and everything in between. There's nothing to cover when you think about children and so we have to be, again, very conscious and very intentional of the things that we're doing that are so small that people are not thinking about. But when you're trying to use that transportation so you can reduce your footprint, or because you have a need, because you don't have a vehicle or you don't have a way to get there, crossing from west to east in a safe place, think about the overpasses that you have to pass 600 north, and that really creates an issue of safety. So now when we talk about active transportation, more walkable communities and walkable roads, guess what? Homelessness is part of the conversation. People are not feeling safe walking. So if it's an issue of lighting, the type of lighting that we're putting right now, our city actually uses really cheap lighting, and it's very polluting. That's something that City Hall can address right away. So let's talk about lighting that is not hurting, that is not hurt, and you actually see differences between lighting between certain parts of the city and other parts of the city. That discussion of equity and sustainability are critical. So if we're going to talk about active transportation, we have to start talking about public safety. Is it safe for me to be walking or let my kids walk from school to home if there's needles, if there's other type of issues that are happening because we haven't tackled homelessness? The city has not done their job when it comes to homelessness. So we need that. Again, it has to be relevant to everyone. It has to be addressing the very much diversity that exists in Salt Lake City. Thank you.
Give me a round of applause for our candidates. That is unfortunately all the time we have. Thank you so much for coming, and to our candidates.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Good job. She didn't even sweat it.